Hello, Happy New Year, I'm Shanalika, welcome back to the channel. It might not actually be New Year by the time this comes out, God knows when this is gonna come out. I actually did a sort of reading roundup video for 2021, but that was like after I said I wasn't gonna be making videos anymore. On one hand, I was like, I'm not supposed to be doing this, and on the other hand, I just didn't like the way the footage came out. The angle of the camera was a bit weird, but I still think it might be good to listen to as a kind of a podcast type thing. There is a visual, I've kind of cropped it so it's basically just my face so that like I don't look too weird. I've also joined Bookworm, I'm sure it's supposed to be said, but you know, it's spelt with a Y. It's basically a sort of defederated alternative to Goodreads. You know how much I like, you know, I'm an active proponent for Mastodon and all that kind of thing, so this is just like the Goodreads version of that. I didn't previously think I needed any kind of book tracker kind of a thing. Apparently this year I read a book called Weather by Jenny Offhill, and having looked at the cover and read the blurb, I cannot remember it at all. I have like no idea what that book is about. So having some kind of system where I can even just, for my own benefit, just make notes about like what I thought of it at the time, so that I can actually kind of recall it later would be useful. I'll be using a star system that for me means 1 means I hated the book, 2 means I disliked the book, 3 means I liked the book, 4 means I liked the book a lot, and 5 means I loved the book. It was quite hard to rank books this year because there were a lot that I liked, so there's a lot of 4s and 5s that I, you know, feel that have quite a lot of variation in terms of like how I feel about them. A star system isn't like the best way of engaging with media, or arguably even a good way of engaging with media, but it's just a sort of convenient like you know, structure for this video. I guess I would say like pay more attention to like what I'm saying about the book than like the rating, because that's literally, it's not an assessment of how good the book is, it's just an assessment of like how much I personally enjoyed it. I didn't finish some books this year. I'm instinctively very completionist, and once I've started something I just can't stop even if I'm actively not enjoying it, so this year was trying to be better at just stopping reading books when they're not good. I'm not sure if that makes my opinion on them kind of invalid because I haven't finished the thing, but then again, I did have enough of an experience to want to stop it. The first 1-star book is called Boneless Mercies. I kind of liked the vibe of this book. It's about like a group of teenagers who are trained in mercy killing, which seems to be basically like euthanasia, except maybe for like a wider range of like permissible causes, like you could request it for, I don't know, if you were sad. Dark and spooky, very strong opening, thought it would be my thing. I hadn't realised it was a young adult book upon picking it up, which wouldn't have necessarily made it like something that I wouldn't read, but it became very obviously young adult in terms of its writing style. Like it became very sort of basic and clunky, and the characters started acting in annoying, like over dramatic ways. One character who's supposed to be friends with another character sort of pulls a knife on them very early in the book over some relatively minor transgression. If you make something that dramatic happen over very little, then it doesn't give you much room to build for something actually dramatic. Then the plot got started and it just felt very forced and very ham-fisted, and I didn't like the direction it was going, and I just gave up good and early. Second 1-star, Library of the Dead. There are a few things I liked about it. I stuck with it for longer than the previous book. I liked the spookiness of it. I liked that the teenager is a kind of like ghost communicator who's like taught by her grandmother. The characters are from like the traveller community, and that's cool. That's not something you see represented very often. The horror is really good, really well written, really creepy and like viscerally disturbing. It's set in Edinburgh, which is like a positive and a negative, because like to me certain locations like carried meaning, but it was so specific about locations without really describing them at all that if you're not familiar with Edinburgh, this would honestly be kind of alienating. If you just say to a random person like, oh, they're going to Wester Hales, like that doesn't mean anything. It's set in like a post-apocalyptic version of the world, like large sections of the city are collapsed and stuff. Everyone greets each other by saying God save the king, so I guess there's like a monarchy again, or like a sort of more significant monarchy again, and it's not really explained, and that's a bit confusing. Like, maybe it gets explained as the book goes on, but there isn't enough context to really understand what that is. So I already didn't like that, but then again, similarly to the last book, I really fell off it when things just got really overdramatic. The protagonist steals into a library, which is like a secret magic library, which is run by her friend's dad. And her friend's dad is like a bit standoffish or whatever, but then he's like, oh, you know, you've committed a terrible crime and you must be put to death. You have to build to drama. You can't just have your friend's dad threatening to murder you. It's just not believable. She sneaks into the library and then gets apprenticed as a wizard or something, and it just felt like it was getting a bit Harry Potter. And after the last thing I read that got a bit Harry Potter, I do not want to go through that again. 2 stars. The Stranding by Kate Sawyer. I picked this book up mostly because I like the cover. And then Kobo changed the cover. It changed it from this to this. I hate that it does that. Even if I'm buying an ebook, I should get to keep the version of the book that had the cover that I liked. I really don't like that it just updates it without my consent. There are 2 sort of time-based narratives in this book. One is like a post-apocalyptic thing where the majority of life on Earth has been wiped out. The narrative focuses on these 2 survivors who escape the kind of apocalypse by like hiding inside a whale. The other part of the narrative is one of those characters' previous life in the months leading up to her ending up in the post-apocalyptic situation. There's a lot of really cool imagery and very nicely illustrative description. I quite like the way that this book was written. I thought it was written quite skillfully. I didn't like the main character. To the point where I didn't care whether she lived or died. I can't remember all the reasons that I didn't like her. It definitely wasn't just this reason, but like her main past narrative is that she has an affair with a guy who has like a pregnant wife and children. I recognize that if an affair is had, then the responsibility lies with the person who is having the affair, the person who has the responsibility to the other person, not someone else who is not otherwise attached. However, she was definitely dislikable for like a bunch of other reasons as well, and also this is a particularly kind of insidious example if someone's like has very young children. I don't like the way she treats her best friend. Basically the main character just comes across as incredibly self-centered and self-interested and with basically little to no regard to other people or how they feel. I just couldn't bring myself to care about her, and given that there are very few characters in this book, since it's after the end of the world, it was very okay. Sometimes I Lie by Alice Feeney. I think it probably wasn't a bad book for this genre. It's more that it illustrated to me that the conventions of this genre are just not ones I get on with. In particular, having a character behave in an implausible way, or deliberately hiding something from the reader in order to facilitate a plot twist. It's not that I hate twists, or even the entire premise of a story hanging on a twist to some degree. Like, I can think of a couple of stories where the twist is very integral to that story being told, and it really works. But I think if you want to hide certain details from the reader, then that needs to be facilitated by the narrative. So, for example, tell the story from the point of view of a character who also doesn't know those details, or from a character who maybe should know those details but like has a mental condition that causes them to forget certain things or misremember them, you know, like a sort of unreliable narrator kind of thing. But if you're telling it from the point of view of a character who has like full control of their faculties and is fully aware of the information that you're hiding, then the only reason to hide it from the reader is to pull the rug out from under them. If I'm reading it and I'm just like, there is no way this character wouldn't have thought about this, and I'm reading the character's thoughts, it makes me very aware I'm reading a story and the story is trying to trick me. I don't think it's good storytelling, personally. The Mermaid of Black Conch by Monique Roffey. This is my yearly 2-star adult fairy tale book. Someone gets turned into a mermaid many years ago as a punishment, and then someone finds her, she gets caught and brought onto land, and then her tail falls off and she turns into a human and she has to kind of adapt to human society. It's a refreshing setting, there's lots of cool imagery and stuff. Again, it's quite well written. But I didn't like the characters or the plot or the subject matter or the themes. It's quite heteronormative, not just like normal heteronormative, but like overly focused on the concept of like men and women as like separate and complementary as a thing, which is not my favourite thing. Focused on purity and virginity as a concept, which is not my favourite thing. Plot is driven by woman on woman jealousy and hate, which never gets addressed or resolved, which is not my favourite thing. The main character believes that men can't control themselves around her because she's so beautiful, and that never gets challenged, and it's not my favourite thing. None of this meant very much to me, really, and it all felt a bit like, oh, come on, we can do better than this. I'm not sure if as many people have a piss kink as comes up in this book. Like, I have to say, when I picked up this book, I wasn't expecting so much piss kink. I wasn't expecting any piss kink. Maybe piss kink is really common, I don't know. It came up quite a lot for a book that wasn't about piss kink. It wasn't awful, it's more just that I don't vibe with the majority of its themes. But I think that's because those themes suck. 3 stars. The Diamond Age by Neal Stephenson. This is a fact book. I'm finding it hard to remember everything that's in it because it's so big and it took me so long to get through, and it does drag. There's so much in this book that just doesn't need to be in there. It's got a lot of really, really impressive concepts in it when it comes to technology and how people will interact with technology, and like, it predicts cryptocurrency, and I think this was written in like the late 90s or something. It's quite sexist and quite racist, but in a sort of amusing way, where like someone of the time is specifically trying not to be sexist or racist, or is trying to like be the opposite of that by having like a strong female lead or whatever, but still falls into like many of the same traps, because they don't quite know what they're doing. Like, for example, the main character, Nell, and the writer is called Neal, this kind of super genius child prodigy, but she's only like that because she gets a book that a sort of super genius man prodigy makes for her. Well, he doesn't actually make it for her, she ends up with it. But anyway, pretty much every male character in the book is sexual towards her, including like her guardian type character who doesn't actually do anything but kind of interacts with her in a way that like her sexuality is still, or like her sexuality that will happen since she's only a child when he's talking to her, is still like at the forefront of all the characters' minds. It also has like one of the weirdest sex scenes I've ever read. Like, the author is trying so hard to describe what's going on while abstracting completely away from like mentioning body parts or like any sort of actual action that is happening. I know like what you think I'm describing, it's like way more than that. The result is just this like absolute trip. It's a good book, really solid good book. I'm not saying that many good things about it, not because they don't exist, but because I can't really remember them. I just know that I did think it was good. If you're willing to like sit through quite a lot of unnecessary rambling. I mean, you watch my videos though, so like, Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell. It's an unusual book because it's speculative fiction and it combines things that you would expect in that genre, like very advanced technology and full acceptance of LGBT people, with archaic systems of sustaining political ties, like monarchy-based arranged marriages. One recently bereaved character is married off to another character in order to sustain political ties between those two nations. Combining all those things results in character dynamics that never could exist in the real world, and that's really enjoyable to me. That's like one of my favorite things. The beginning where these two characters are like having to like just get married when they don't know each other at all, it's written in this very entertaining way with this very sort of believable awkwardness. However, as the book progresses, the characters' relationship hangs more and more on basically one miscommunication. It's a bit complicated because one of the main characters has obviously been through some stuff and is also either autistic or on the ace spectrum or both, which in all fairness could result in some really specific and unusual behavioural patterns. Knowing all of that, I still found myself going, I really just think they would have had a proper conversation by now. I don't like books about winter. That was unfair. Why did you pick up a book that was called that? Look, it was Christmas. Well, it wasn't Christmas. It was December, and I was like, I can snuggle up with a cold, wintry book. They're in their city, and it's all like cold, and the environment is just cold, and it's like, oh, it's okay because they can go in their houses, and then it can be warm. But then they go into the wilderness, and they're like trekking around, and they're like, oh, we need to pitch a tent, and oh, we need to light a fire, and oh, we need to fight a bear. It makes me feel cold. That's completely to do with me, and not really a criticism of the book at all. But I did find that the wilderness section just dragged. I don't like the combat in this book either. None of it seemed plausible. I liked that it had gays in it. The gender stuff was alright. It had a prominent non-binary character. That's nice. Different planets have different ways of displaying gender, or rather pronouns, which are kind of conflated in this book. For the main planet, I think men wear metal jewelry and women wear wooden jewelry, and non-binary people wear no jewelry or glass. It's something like that. I'm not entirely sure that I buy that this is their gender system and that monosexuality is still a thing. And I know it's still a thing because it specifies at the start. Like, if gender is so arbitrary that people fully accept it on the basis of what earrings you wear, then how does that provide the basis for a sexuality? Like, no, sorry, I'm only into people who, like, wear wood. And then where do non-binary people fit into that? Honestly, this relates to something I've been thinking about a lot lately when it comes to like gender and sexuality in the real world, but I am not going to talk about that until I have a very well thought through and very carefully worded script. I think it was taking on a lot with navigating a very tense relationship with one particularly complicated character. The overarching premise of the book is total collapse of their current political system and potentially plunging into a massive, massive war. It felt like too big of a problem to resolve satisfyingly in the space that the book had. On the subject of ambitious sci-fi, we need to talk about The Last Human. Holy shit! I read this book in January, so I can't remember as much about it as I would like, but the amount that has stayed with me, I think, just goes to show how wildly entertaining and imaginative this book was. It's set in a universe where humans are, I think, extinct, and they're hated by all the other alien species. I think maybe because they were very warmongering. That sounds about right. The main character is a human who is posing as a different type of alien because they don't know what humans look like because they're all extinct. Who is raised by a member of the species called the Widow, which seems to be just giant spiders with spikes for legs. Plot follows kind of authorities realizing that there is a human living on the planet and then coming after her, and then she has to escape. I really, really love the beginning. I really love the relationship between like the teenage human and her spider mother. One really important sort of mechanism of this book is that creatures are ranked according to intelligence. There are 5 tiers, and a species is placed in a tier on the basis of its intelligence in comparison to all other species. And humans, I think, are tier 2. As it goes from one character to another and explores the minds of higher tier characters, what that level of intelligence seems to give the character is basically increased capacity to manipulate the world around them by knowing exactly how other characters are going to behave in certain scenarios. So they can essentially cause other characters to do their bidding without the other characters ever knowing that that's what they're doing. That just kind of escalates in a way that, like, I'm not gonna say too much more about because it would spoil it, but it's really, really ambitious. I debated giving this 5 stars because it had that kind of monumentous effect on me that I normally associate with, like, a superlative book. But I do think that while it's still extremely, extremely good, and I would strongly recommend it, I think it kind of shot itself in the foot with attempting to kind of work on so many levels within just the one book. The scope of what is happening at the end of the book is so enormous compared to what is happening at the beginning that I feel like certain smaller things that are, you know, that you can connect to more as a human, because, you know, we are quite small in the grand scheme of things, those are kind of lost as the book progresses. If this author just took this same story and essentially rebooted it as 3 books, which is, I think, what would be necessary in order to tell a story as grandiose as this and still give enough attention to the characters as individuals, I would absolutely read it. Star of Acre by Andrew Michael Hurley. This is a nice spooky read about a couple who are mourning their dead son, living on a remote farm, and kind of coping with their grief in very different ways. I like how it integrates folklore and explores grief. I like that it messes with the characters and the reader's expectations of what's good and what's bad. Very horrid, deeply unpleasant, highly unsettling. A delight. The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin. I finally managed to read some Le Guin. I finally managed to understand some of her big words. Not most of them, though. A lot of the sections of this book where the characters are just standing around talking about quantum physics just went straight over my head. There's one planet and one moon, and they're called Urus and Anaris. I can't actually remember which way round they are. I think Urus is the planet and Anaris is the moon. At some point in the past, the anarchists were causing such a ruckus on Urus that they rounded them all up and sent them to the moon. They were like, look, you can have your like, you know, communist utopia, but you're gonna go do it somewhere else. Again, it has that kind of spliced, like, past and present narrative, one with the main character who's called Shivek, his life on Naris, what, like, growing up there and going to university there and everything is like, and how their society functions, and then the present day, which is that he's been called to Urus for, I actually cannot even remember what field he's in, just that it's to do with, like, space travel, I think. And he's been called there because of his studies on quantum physics are gonna help make faster space travel, something. And Urus want in on that. I really like the way that she does dialogue and interaction, actually, although it's not mad conventional. She leaves quite a lot of space in the dialogue without, like, quite saying, oh, this character does this and this character does that. She just kind of leaves gaps, and it's artfully done. I find that, like, my brain will just fill in the necessary information. It's like just a really good example of, like, less is more style writing. I like the dialogue when they're interacting in a more normal way about normal things and not just standing around, like, debating things. Her writing style is quite dry and it can be very slow going, but this is a very impressive book in terms of how she creates a believable society with completely different rules and conventions to our own. Kind of similarly to Becky Chambers' third book, it explores what a communist society could look like without making it out to be a utopia, in fact specifically exploring what happens under conditions of scarcity. We still suffer, we just all suffer equally. Even then, the system doesn't perfectly sustain its own set of values. There are still people within it who have, like, capitalistic or proprietarian leanings. It's an enormous concept, and it takes a very impressive writer to make it work, and it works. My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. This is a story about someone whose sister keeps killing her boyfriends, and the main character has to keep cleaning up after her and is starting to question whether or not these killings are always happening in self-defense, as her sister says, or whether or not there's more to it than that. This was excellent, very absorbing, very funny, very refreshing to have a book that's centered mostly on a relationship between siblings. I don't 100% buy every single aspect of the sisters' relationship, but that's something I tend to be hypercritical about, and I, again, haven't personally experienced the same traumas that these people have gone through, so very, very minor criticism there. It was very solid, really enjoyed it. Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is a fantasy series set in a world resembling the Americas pre-colonization. That alone is reason enough to read it. It's so refreshing to get away from the kind of Tolkien-esque, very sort of European white standards of like what fantasy is. It's really nice to step away from that and work with a completely different set of symbols and mythology. Solid and really sort of well-designed characters, very believable interactions between them. It's sometimes humorous. Gorgeous and evocative imagery. I would recommend it to anyone who likes fantasy and is bored of it being European. And I will read the next one at some point. Hello, welcome to Scruffy Cam. I was really disorganized with this video and just forgot quite a few books that I do want to actually talk about, so I'm just gonna throw them in this way, and yeah, it means some of the audio won't be as good and stuff. Apologies. But the thing is, I think the better I get at being okay with my videos being less polished, probably the more content I'll actually be able to make. So the first book that I forgot to talk about was The Tiger and the Wolf by Adrian Tchaikovsky. I thought I could do this video and not include any Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is an odd one because, based purely on the description, because it's about kind of ye olden days folk who kind of live off the land, hunter-gatherer type folk who can turn into animals. And it's just, I don't care about shapeshifters, like that's been done. It's not interesting, or like it doesn't have any inherent interest to me. But the fact that it was by Adrian Tchaikovsky made me at least try the book, and it starts off with these like wolf people who are like running after some prey, and it's like, oh, but yeah, wolves. I mean, the thing is, it's always wolves, isn't it? Nobody kins as like a guinea pig. They're running through the forest, and eventually they catch the stag, and then the stag turns into a guy, and it's like, oh, it's carnivore confusion. That's interesting. That's actually not kind of the direction the book goes in, but it was still just really surprisingly good. I mean, maybe not surprisingly because it's Adrian Tchaikovsky and I've liked everything of his I've read so far, but totally different genre to what he normally does. He's normally sci-fi, not fantasy. The main character has parents who are from, like, the tiger tribe and the wolf tribe, respectively. It's basically a story about growing up with parents who despise one another and trying to work out what that means for you. Which is relatable content. It's not necessarily my favourite genre, in keeping with what I said about like wilderness earlier. It was still really enjoyable, and I will read the rest of the series. The 24-Hour Cafe. This is a story about a couple of creatives working in the same cafe, doing day jobs while they try and get their sort of creative careers, which are like dance and music respectively, off the ground. Depressingly relatable content. It's really nice. It's just a good story about like friendship and about dreams not coming true. I can't really remember everything about it, but just that it definitely like hit home for me, like way too close to home. In the 5-star category, I forgot to talk about what's that say? Flowers for Algernon. It's just a very, very affecting, very well written book. I don't really have tons of detailed things to say about this book. I would just suggest that if you are someone who likes science fiction, that this goes on your list. Dogs of War by Adrian Tchaikovsky. I when I read Bearhead last year, or, you know, the year before that, I didn't realize that it was a sequel. Like, the fact that it's a sequel makes a lot more sense. It still works really well as a standalone book. I don't mind having read them in backwards order. The book didn't have, like, a very obvious, like, 2 on it or anything. You could have made that clear if you really wanted people to read them in order, and you would only make that not clear if you were kind of okay with people not reading them in order. So it was really interesting knowing what happens in the next book, but, like, reading the context of where Honey, who is the bear in the second book, what her life was like while she was training with other bioforms. And the main character of this book focuses on Rex, who is a dog bioform, and his struggle to kind of deal with his own, like, morality and his own, you know, independence versus the obedience that is literally built into him and is a part of his genes because he's a dog, and that's, like, what dogs have been bred to do. It's an amazing book, extremely emotionally affecting. I cried. Would strongly recommend both Bearhead and Dogs of War to people in any order. The Man Who Fell to Earth. This is a book about an alien person who comes to Earth in the hope of saving his people, I think by building a spaceship. He has, like, much higher intelligence, so he can sort of accumulate money in a way that most average people wouldn't be able to do, and then he's perceived as a sort of just eccentric millionaire who's doing weird projects. I wasn't expecting to like this book as much as I did. It affected me in a very sort of profound way. It was very painful and upsetting at points, and just very human. I really loved the main alien character. It just didn't want anything bad to happen to him. It's wonderful. I think it's just a really, really brilliant book. I have nothing negative to say about it. I mean, it's like mildly dated, but that's because of the time it was written, and, like, for that time there's not... You know, I would just overlook that and read it anyway. Uzumaki by Junji Ito. I read this book in quite a few installments. I couldn't stomach it all at once. I struggle with horror in general, not because I don't like it, but because my brain is so overactive that it will take things and just play them back to me in such a way that it makes my like limbic system think that there's an actual threat. And then I can't sleep. So, it doesn't matter intellectually whether or not I'm scared of a thing or whether or not I know the thing's real or not. It just sends my body into a kind of fight or flight response, like my brain will just do that to itself. So I have to be a bit careful about what horror I consume, or kind of, like, making sure I have nothing on the next day so I can have a bad night's sleep. I didn't think that a comic, I was like, oh, you know, well, it's just pictures, it'll be fine. It wasn't fine. This comic bothered me way more than, like, a lot of the horror films I've seen. It's beautiful, it's nauseating, it's terrifying, and it's hilarious. It's just, like, it's everything you could possibly want. The plots are ridiculous, I will say that. The plots are just stupid. Like the idea that the characters would sit there and not try to leave before they do is just nonsense, and, like, the main character is absolutely does that thing of just wandering into danger over and over again. The plots are daft. However, I don't think it matters, because this is more of, like, an art experience than really a story. I don't think the story is that important. There's so many cool ideas. I love that his concept for this book was just like, I'm gonna take the spiral and think of every single possible way that could be frightening. Absolutely amazing. I'm definitely gonna read more of his stuff. I will put myself through that again. Earthlings. Given that my favourite book that I read last year was Bunny by Mona Awad, it won't be surprising to anyone who's read both of these books that I really, really enjoyed Earthlings as well. Clearly I just like stories that are unhinged. I read Convenience Store Woman in 2021, but I think I read it just after filming my 2021 reading video, otherwise I think I would have mentioned it. I enjoyed Convenience Store Woman as well, but I think that this book just takes the sort of the themes from that, and just makes everything more and makes everything hit harder. If you've read Surfacing by Margaret Atwood, it kind of has like some of that energy as well. I was completely duped by the cute cover of this book and the way it begins. Like, there are some sort of unusual things happening at the start, but it's still all kind of like, okay, well, but this is within the realms of like what kids might do and like how society functions, and it's not anything so out of the ordinary. So when it got weird, it just really took me by surprise, and I really, really enjoyed that. I have to say that in general, I do like not knowing what's coming in a book. I think that if someone had told me like, oh, it starts off kind of normal, but then it gets weird, maybe I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much. So I think videos like this, even though I'm not like saying anything that's a spoiler, I think videos like this are not something I would really enjoy watching. So I think what I'll do is I'll also put a list of all of these books and their star ratings in the description, so that if you just want to get some recommendations rather than hearing anything that may influence your experience of the book, then you can have that. I should have really said that at the beginning. Certain characters in the book identify the factory, which refers to not just capitalism, but specifically like heterosexual nuclear family reproductive capitalism. The two tenets of being a good component in the factory that are identified by the protagonist are reproduction and hard work. The aversion to human reproduction that comes across in both Convenience Store Women and Earthlings is something that like just resonates with me very well. The characters often have an aversion to sex as well, though, which I don't feel so much. But I also feel like that is legitimately just like less of a bad thing. It's interesting reading about a character who is kind of constantly pressurized by her sort of, you know, her Earthling companions to settle down, to have children. I don't personally experience that kind of thing very much, you know, because I have escaped the factory as much as I can. Like, I'm still sort of within it, but I've escaped heterosexuality by and large. I know very few straight people, and the majority of my close friends are all trans. Having kids is not just something that isn't expected, but something that is sometimes side-eyed a bit, and like there's a whole ass debate about whether or not it's ethical to do so. First, when I was reading this, I was like, oh, maybe this is a sort of cultural thing, and the pressure is higher in Japan. But I don't know if that's necessarily what it is, or if it's more just that, like, I live in a subculture within the UK where those pressures don't exist. This book is harrowing in the first half, and then just becomes absurdly funny in the second. I laughed out loud quite a few times while reading this, much to my partner's annoyance, because I think it probably is really annoying when you can't see what someone is, you can't actually engage with someone with what someone's laughing at, and they're just sitting there laughing to themselves. It's probably quite irritating. It has the same kind of absurdism as Convenience Store Women, but Convenience Store Women is all very kind of like restrained and rigid and segmented, whereas Earthlings is chaotic and deranged. How to Kill Your Family by Bella Mackay. Oh my god, where do I start? I have not rooted for a character to commit murder this hard since I read Kindred. That's also amazing, go read Kindred. I find the more I like something, the harder it is to talk about, because I just want to be like, just go read it and then come back and see if you agree. It's about a girl who grows up with a sick mother who then dies in under very poor circumstances. Her father is this very rich millionaire who just kind of had an affair with her mother and then wanted nothing more to do with it and didn't support her even when she was dying. It's about the daughter getting revenge by killing the millionaire's entire family in the hopes of getting his inheritance. It's glorious. There is almost no one who isn't gonna be called out at some point by this book, and it's mocking of just about everybody. But it's good, you gotta get called out now and then. Brilliantly funny, so creative. I love the protagonist. I will admit, it was a begrudging 5 stars, because there was one aspect of the book that I didn't just not like but actually hated. There's an aspect of the book that felt almost spiteful towards the reader, like it was punishing us for rooting for a murderer, like it was going, oh, by the way, murder is bad, in case you didn't know. It honestly didn't make that much sense in the narrative. It stretched the boundaries of plausibility more than I was willing to accept. I tried to find a way to make it work. Like, I enjoyed this book so much that I actually tried to find a way to respect this choice by the author, but I just couldn't. It wasn't good. I'm still giving it 5 stars because that is how good the rest of the book was. I am angrily giving it 5 stars. Finally, I think my absolute favourite read of this year, Blood Child by Octavia E. Butler. This is a short story compilation, so it's super unusual that I'd be rating it so highly. Not because I don't like short stories, but because they tend to they're a bit sort of ephemeral. Like, I experienced them at the time and then usually just kind of forget them. So if I've read a short story anthology, it's not that likely to have like a big impact on me. But the title story, Blood Child, is not just the best short story I've ever read, but probably one of the best stories I've ever read. It has visceral horror, emotional intensity, trope subversion, impossible character dynamics, just like everything I like is packed into this like tiny space. It's so clever. It makes you think. I can't really tell you what it's about because it's a short story, right? So if you say what the plot is, then you've basically just told the story. The entire thing is worth reading just for that. But the other stories are also excellent. Some of them are very, very disturbing, like the story that immediately follows Blood Child was just so upsetting to read. And there's another one in the book that kind of has like similar themes to Blood Child as well. Just an excellent collection of short stories. Blood Child as a story I enjoyed so much that I wish it was a whole novel. Even though it doesn't need to be, like it does what it does very well, very concisely, and it's just quick and efficient and does what it needs to do in the space that it has. I just want more of it. I think that's everything. I haven't read the final Murderbot story yet. I think I just kind of forgot about it this year. So that's on my reading list for next year. My socials are in the description. These are my monthly coffee supporters. If you would like to help support me to make more videos, then you can join them if you like. If you want to support in a way that isn't money, then you can do that by liking this video, sharing it, and subscribing to the channel. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you next time. Bye!